Today I'm here to talk about hacking websites or web applications. It's something that I do on a daily basis. Basically, my job is hacking the websites you guys create or try to optimize. And within that, I get access to a lot of data, but also I'm able to do things like slow down websites and the things that you guys are trying to protect against. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be talking about how I go about doing what I do so that you guys can understand the kinds of things that we do as a business outside of web optimization and performance. So yeah, basically, like I said, I'm a security consultant. I perform ethical hacking. Ethical hacking is a term that I don't really like because it just sounds a bit funny, but it's better than penetration tester. So, so basically my job is to take on the role of a hacker and also unskilled hackers. So you might have come across the term script kiddies, and to try and find low-hanging fruits, find serious vulnerabilities within your web applications, your infrastructure, and any funny devices that you may have. I do a lot of security research, and today what I'm going to be doing is a demo of a web application for a competition that I won. So basically I took the web application from the guy who made it, and I'm going to run through it. And the reason I chose this is because it shows exactly what a real website would look like. So it has like an inbuilt intranet for some company, and the idea behind this whole challenge was to answer a few questions, and then I won a prize. So these are all of the questions, but these are the main questions, just so you can kind of see. We call this a capture the flag. So the idea was to get a password for a user, find out who somebody within the company met on a particular day, and then also find the password to another user with the aim of becoming an administrator and taking over the server. So, without boring you too much on that, what I'm going to do is introduce you to the website. B-Sides London is a free conference. There's also going to be a B-Sides Manchester this year as well. So if you're interested in security, it's a free event. Go and sign up for it. So one of the most important tools for me, like when I do application assessments, is a tool called Burp Suite. Burp Suite is an intercepting proxy. So if you guys have ever used Fiddler or Zap or anything like that, it's pretty much the same, but like made for security professionals. So as you're intercepting requests and responses, it does scans against the requests and responses to try and see if it finds any particular vulnerabilities. I'm not going to use that right now, but what I've got here is a login page. Now, straight away, one of the first things that I would do, even if I've got credentials, is try to see what I can get out away from the login page. Usually a client will give me one URL and it'll say, do what you can. So one of the first things that I would look at is the robots.txt file. And sometimes you get some interesting things in here, sometimes you don't. In particular, in this one, you have a Git repository. Git is, in my opinion, a better version of SVN. It allows you to do things like source control, and it allows you to have multiple developers working on certain things at the same time. So what I want to do is I want to have a look at this Git repository, and obviously it's got some information in there. So what I would do now, just delete my test the other day. Oh, that doesn't work. Okay, so what I would do now is I would just grab that Git repository. So sorry. So what this is going to do is just grab all of the files within the Git folder on the website. And then if I have a quick look inside there and then do a git status just gives you some information about the repository. What you can see there, hopefully, is these are the files and the folders that I've grabbed from like the Git repository, and then there is a file that was deleted previously. So what I can do here, and it sounds interesting obviously, the biggest thing about like hacking and penetration testing is the idea of just gathering information, and remembering it for a later stage, because you'll find something that might not sound very interesting at first, but then in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, one day, usually 5 minutes before the end of the test, becomes interesting and you can then go and use. So what you can do is you can check out that this particular file. If I can select it, there we go. Yeah, I think that worked. Yeah. And then I can cat that file. So for those of you who know how to code and know PHP, basically this is two functions, an encryption function and a decrypt function. And then in the comments are really great for me. I was on a code review job recently, and when you see comments, you know that you're going to find some things, especially if they have swearing in them as well. So this one in particular, it just tells me that this is the function used for logging in particular the encrypt function, the first one here. I can't really do anything with that right now, but remembering that I have it is important. So after lots of, no, that's not right. After lots of reconnaissance, which I'm not going to do now because we don't have time, I will then come back to the main website and I'll start doing what I do, I guess. So this is a very simple one, and you'll be really surprised with how many people actually do this kind of thing, putting usernames and passwords within HTML comments. Obviously that's not very interesting and it's quite boring, but you know, it gets you into the web application. Well, it should get you into the web application. Cool, so I'm into the website now. The next question, if you don't remember, was who did Iggy meet on the 20th of January? So once I'm logged in, very much the same as when I'm not logged in, when I'm not authenticated, I would start just clicking through particular things and like look in the history, look into the history of my my burp logs. Again, this is another thing that I'd like to take note of, because what's happening here is the PHP file is including another PHP file. So if there's any way in which I can put anything on the box or get anything that's, you know, malicious on the server, I want to be remembering that I might be able to include it within this content.php file here, because they're doing this twitter.php. And if you have a look at the page, and because I'm not connected to the internet, you can't see it, but this is like a Twitter feed. So here you would have, you know, the tweets for B-Sides London. So that's another thing to make note of. Competitions, just a static page, it looks like. Challenge, there, the questions. And then when you go over here, you see messages. And then I start thinking, oh, okay, so I can see messages from a particular person. Now, read messages, read everything, make a note of everything that you see, because it might lead you to understand the layout of the application. So this isn't really that interesting. This is quite interesting. So they're saying that they have some odd behavior with the intranet and that it's running slow. And then Mark posted back saying, yeah, it looks like someone really likes our news articles for some reason. So two things that I think right here is, well, if Mark is able to see like what's happening and what's running slow, then he must have some elevated privilege that Matt doesn't. So he might be an administrator. And secondly, if something's running slow on the news articles, why is it running slow? Like what's happening there? So that's that. But obviously I want to find out who Iggy met on the 20th. So as I go through, if I turn this on, and I go back here and click messages, you can see that it's requesting the mail.php page. If I press forward, then what's happening is that it's using a parameter called user ID. So, oh no, that's the wrong one. I can send that to something called intruder. Intruder basically allows me to brute force or do things with parameters. So I'll show you an example of that. So what I can do is I can say that number there, that number in that parameter, let me chuck some numbers against it from 1 to 20. Most of our clients don't like us doing many brute force attacks on live environments. So even though this shouldn't really cause any problems, You know, you try and limit it to what you think is going to be possible. And then you start attack. As you can see, that was very quick. I'm hosting it locally. What I would do now is I would have a look at the payload, the original payload, which is 1. So here, user ID is 1, the response comes back with some JSON, and the length is 957. If I have a look at one of the others, it's 297. There's a lot of 297s, and the messages are none. So that must mean that there is either no messages for that user, or there is no user at all. So I can sort by length, and I can see 1, which is the one that we were on before, and 16. 16 is, if you have a look through 16, you can see who the message is being sent from. So you can see here from Iggy, meeting with Ronald McDonald went really well today. So there I have my answer. So that isn't really interesting in terms of a penetration test, but in terms of the challenge that I was doing, you know, it was quite interesting. The main thing that I want to really be looking at, though, is what was said within the messages earlier about the page being, you know, taking a lot of load. So if I go to the latest news page and I click on one of these news articles here, I can see that there is another ID parameter. So this ID parameter, if we take the same idea as we had before and have a look at the history and take it, we can chuck it into something called repeater. Now what repeater allows me to do is just send raw requests and receive raw responses. So I can press go, it'll give me the response, and I can render the response using a not so nice rendering engine, but that's by the by. So what I can do now is I can start playing with that. So I can start doing single quotes to see like if I can get SQL injection. SQL injection allows me to interact with the back-end database through the web application. Single quotes in this case won't work because this parameter is an integer. So integer injections don't require any single quotes or quotes. So if I go to 43, sorry, if I go back and go to 42, obviously that's like a valid record. If I go to 43, that isn't a valid record. So if I do -1, I'm doing a mathematical function there, and that is actually taking it to 42. So if I go to 44 minus 2, it's taking me back to that. So what's happening here is I'm actually doing mathematical functions within the ID parameter, which for me I would presume that means that I have some kind of SQL injection. Now, I can go on and start trying to do this manually. I'll show you an example of this now. So what I've done here is, imagine loads of steps have gone on, but I've enumerated that this particular area is using 4 columns within the database. So you can see that there's the ID number, there's the date and time, there's the title, and then there's the content. So there are 4 columns being used within the database. And what's happening is, and you can imagine in your head, you're getting a select everything where the ID number is 42. And what that does is that pulls down that information there. So what I'm doing here now is I'm saying, okay, do that, but also select from 4 other pieces of information. So I'm saying null, 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 I don't want anything else. But then I'm using some kind of stored procedure called database, which is then giving me, and you have to encode that, otherwise where there's a space, the web app is going to just get rid of everything after the space. So what I'm doing now is I press go, and you can see here that I get the response B-sides. B-sides, I would then guess, is the name of the database that's currently being used. And I can change this to user. And that'll give me the user of the database that's being used. So obviously I can do this manually, but it can be very time consuming and quite boring sometimes. So what you can do is there's a tool that a guy at NTC has wrote called SQL Map, which is a really awesome tool. I'm just trying to remember where I have it. Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm just getting rid of the stuff that I did this morning when I was testing it. So what I can do now is if I put that back to the normal value, 42, and it shows a legitimate response from the web server. I can click here and press copy to file and save that as test. I can then give SQL Map a command that says use the request within the test file, which is basically just this copied within it, and start trying to find SQL injection vulnerabilities. What I'll do is I'll put it verbose. So what's happening now is it's trying to inject into the parameter that was found within the URL with different types of SQL injection queries. So it's looking for things like what database is it using, what type of input is it integer or is it some text, and it's going off and doing it. And as you can see here, it's saying that the get parameter ID is vulnerable. Do you want to keep testing? No, I don't. I've got a vulnerability. Let's play with it for a little bit. So what I can do now is I can say, give me all of the columns that are within the database that we're currently in. So if I type columns, what that'll do is that'll use the SQL injection to bring back a list of the columns and then the tables as well within that. So the most interesting one for me is users. You've got full names, ID, usernames, and then you have this enc password, which makes sense because we found right at the beginning the encryption code that encrypts the passwords. So what I can do here now is say, give me a SQL shell, and let me select everything from the users table. And that's now given me all of the users with their passwords as well. But obviously they're in an encrypted form. So what I can do now is take the code that I found earlier. So I can take the code that I found earlier, and I can add some of my own code to it. So I've already got it on here to save time. So what I've done is I've taken the exact same code. So I have the encryption function, the decrypt function, but then I've created an array. So an array is like a list. So it makes sense if you just look at the code here. You've got the username with their password, the username with their password, the username with their password. So the code that I've now written underneath is, for each line, I've missed a step, sorry. So when you're looking within here, you can see that there are some other users with really high IDs. Obviously, I only did 1 to 20. 1 to 20 was just because I didn't want to, cause unnecessary load on the server. So because I now have these numbers here, I can go back to the messages. I can go back to the messages. And try and type in one of those others. So what this has done now is this has given me somebody else's messages within the application. Let me turn that off. So I have a look through. The intranet is running slow. Can you take a look? Iggy sending a message about image uploading. Hey Wiki, can you upload images? I don't have permission. Again, that confirms to me that Wiki has some kind of elevated privilege. And now a mobile interface. So I'm trying to look at the messages on my mobile and it's not working. Can you have a look? So why isn't it working? And what errors is the guy getting? So what I can do is change my user agent and try and go to the mail page again. And I'm getting an error saying that they can't open this config YAML file. So what I do is I just take this config YAML file and I just try and find where it is. Maybe it's not in the right location. So I basically just spam that into every URL that I can find to see if I can find it, and I do. And again, you'll be very surprised how often you see stuff like this. This looks really easy, but I would say on about 50 to 60% of my tests, I get some kind of disclosure like this and about 25% of those are from unauthenticated. So we now have the encryption key. So going back to where we were before, one of the things that is being used here is the value, so the password and an encryption key. So I can't obviously decrypt the passwords without that encryption key. So now I've found that, what I can say is for each of these lines within this array, using the key really, really secret, and the user from the array and the encrypted password from the array, decrypt it using the decrypt function. So if I do that, what I get now is the user's passwords. So going back to the questions that I asked myself at the beginning, what is Wiki's password or Mark's password? His password is wiki wacky hacky. So going back to where we were before and changing my user agent back to its default, what I can do now is I can log out of the application and go in as the administrator. Wiki wacky hacky. So one of the things in the messages that I saw was an image upload. And image uploads to me are like the best findings that can ever happen, because 9 times out of 10 web developers don't check file types, they don't check what's inside the files, and you can upload pretty much anything. And with this being a PHP application, that means great things for me. So what I'm doing now is I will just click through the application as the administrator. What you can do is you can use Burp to spider the websites and then compare the sitemaps, and it'll tell you which pages weren't available as a normal user. But for the case of this, it's here. So you have an image uploader. So it's really important to figure out how the image uploader works. So if you take this and drag that there, so it's a multi-part MIME type. What it's doing is it's getting a name, but it doesn't really need a name, that's undefined. It's taking the file and then putting the file within there. So if I forward that, turn intercept off, it uploads the file to a location, press enter, and then the file is now uploaded. So what I can try and do now is upload a PHP file to see if that works. And the PHP file that I've got, without going into too much detail about it, what it's doing is it's allowing me to interact with the operating system through PHP. So it's basically a web shell. So, and you can do web shells in one line, but this is like a nicer one just so you can see how it works. So if I drag the shell, it says only images are allowed. So I can try things now. I can try changing the file extension. I can try to include that within the image. I can try playing around with a file header. I can try a lot of things. But one of the most simplest and easiest ways to try and get past it, which, to be honest with you, only works, a small percentage of the time, but it still does work, is by just doing this. So if I turn intercept on, I drag the image, I go to the end of the file, and then I paste in the PHP, press forward. That's now been uploaded with my PHP code attached to the end of it. So this is where you start getting really excited as a pen tester, and you press enter on your URL and nothing happens, and you cry to yourself a little bit and you start pulling people in to help you. But then, right at the beginning, we found an include. So what's happening here, the reason why the PHP isn't executing is because you're just rendering an image. There's no execution from PHP here. So what we need to do is find a way to include our image with our PHP code within a page that is executing our PHP. So if you remember right back at the beginning, we found that Twitter was being included. A file called twitter.php was being included. What we can do is we can go back there, go to Burp, see in our history here, go to Twitter, send that to repeater, and then we can put our image in there and press go and copy the URL. And then again, fingers crossed, and you start again crying to yourself that your shell isn't working. So this is where it really gets tight, and this is usually 5 minutes before the end of the test. You have the report to write tomorrow and you're trying to figure out what's going on. You know this should work, So you start just getting desperate and start just going down the directory structure. So this will go back up into the folder beforehand and then try and find the file. And thankfully, you find your file, and at first you're like, oh, okay, but then you have your PHP code being executed as well. So from here, you can now start executing commands. So you can look within the file structure, you can cat the passwd file, which stores all of the users within the a Linux operating system. You've got the ability to cat files. Cat is just reading them. You can edit files. So one of the things I might do here now is I might edit the PHP of the login page to record every single user that's been logged in. I might start defacing the website. I might try, I don't know if this will work, but I might try rebooting. Let's see if, so this is the server here. If I just log in, I don't know if what it's running as, but no, that didn't work. But depending on the permissions of the web server and who's running as, and believe me, people run their web servers as root, you can reboot the server, you can start. One of the nicest things I found in the forensic investigation was people using pay-to-click ads and putting them on pages, and then actually like getting money every time somebody clicked on a link on the website. Loads of different things like that. So this is kind of like a very, very quick run through of how I would go through it, kind of my mindset, what I'm thinking at the time. There are the answers to the original 3 questions that I found. Thanks.